Before America became a beacon of power and progress, it was a land cradled in ancient forests and echoing rivers, home to civilizations that thrived long before European foot ever touched its shores. This story begins not with ships on the horizon, but with the whispers of the earth stories of the native peoples who lived in harmony with the land, who watched the stars and hunted the buffalo, who sang songs beneath the trees. What followed was a tidal wave of change, discovery and conquest, resistance and rebellion, revolution and rebirth. From the shores of the Atlantic to the Pacific, America was shaped by many hands, some reaching in hope, others in hunger. This is not merely the tale of presidents and pioneers. It is the story of all who walked this land, the enslaved and the free, the warrior and the weaver, the dreamer and the dispossessed. It is a chronicle of triumph and trauma, of mistakes repeated and ideals reborn. Settle in as we drift through the centuries, tracing the roots of a nation that was and still is becoming. Please subscribe for more Sleep Time videos and comment which part of the world's history you want to know. Before the masts pierced the horizon, before compasses pointed west, and before the names of Columbus or Cabot echoed in royal courts, there was a world, a living world. In that land later called America, vast and varied civilizations thrived. Towering forests whispered secrets to the stars, and rivers like the Mississippi carried the lifeblood of ancient peoples through valleys rich with corn, spirit, and song. The ancestral Puebloans built homes into cliffs, stone stacked on stone beneath desert skies. The Mississippians raised great earthen mounds at Cahokia, where thousands gathered beneath the eyes of the gods. The Iroquois Confederacy wove diplomacy into the roots of their trees, with councils and laws older than European kingdoms. And farther north, Inuit hunters followed the seal and the whale across ice. Farther south, the Maya studied the stars with eyes wiser than their years. Each tribe, each nation, each soul alive with purpose. Their stories threaded the wind. In 1492, on a wind-brushed September morning, 3 ships set out from Palos de la Frontera, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. At their helm was a man with flame behind his eyes and salt in his beard. Cristoforo Colombo Cristobal Colon to Spain, Christopher Columbus to history. But Columbus did not seek the unknown. He believed he knew the shape of the world. What he sought was a shorter road to the riches of the East. What he found was not what he expected. After weeks adrift, with mutiny whispering through his crew, land appeared. October 12th, the island of Guanahani called by its people the Taino, long before Columbus claimed it as San Salvador. Columbus knelt in prayer. The Taino watched in silence. They came ashore wearing metal and speaking in tongues. The Taino greeted them with gifts, woven cotton and ripe fruit. They had never seen such ships. Columbus wrote in his journal, "They are gentle and without knowledge of evil." But he also wrote of gold, of conversion, of conquest. To the Taino, the strangers were gods or spirits, or perhaps simply lost men. To Columbus, the natives were subject souls to be saved, lands to be claimed. So began the cycle of kindness met with confusion, curiosity met with ambition, trust met with iron. What began with gifts and gestures would spiral into enslavement, rebellion, and sorrow. While Columbus sailed, the continent breathed. In the southwest, the Hopi observed the solstice from Quibus beneath the stars. In the Great Plains, bison thundered beneath painted skies as Lakota and Comanche hunters followed in rhythm. The Haudenosaunee gathered beneath the tree of peace, debating in the longhouse. The Lenape fished from birch canoes. The Chinook watched the sun set beyond the cliffs, their nets heavy with salmon. And in the forests of the northeast, a boy named Coyotes could hear the birds tell stories. His grandfather had once said, "The land remembers everything, even when we forget." These people had medicine, government, astronomy, and art. Their world was full, structured, sacred. After Columbus returned, the flood began. Conquistadors followed. Cabot sailed to Newfoundland. Cartier up the St. Lawrence. De Soto, Pizarro, courts all chasing gold, glory, and God. But they did not come to an empty land. They came to a place already named, already home, to peoples with memory, myth, and mother tongues. The Spanish carved paths through the Caribbean and Central America. The French moved through the rivers of the north. The English anchored on the Atlantic shore. Each flag brought new maps. Each cross brought new rules. Each step meant a collision of worlds. With contact came more than weapons. Horses thundered into the plains, changing hunting forever. Corn, beans, squash traveled east. Tobacco filled European pipes. But so did disease, smallpox, measles, plague. Entire villages vanished like smoke. The land wept. Yet not all was death. There was resistance, adaptation, trade, language exchanged between rivers and ports, marriages between French fur traders and Algonquin women, new alliances, new betrayals. Even among suffering, life continued. Children were born beneath the stars. Stories passed from tongue to tongue. The land still held memory. Some tribes merged, others vanished, and new identities emerged, blending, surviving. In 1607, Jamestown rose from the marshes. In 1620, Plymouth's Mayflower found frozen shores. The English came not as explorers, but settlers. And again the cycle returned. Some came seeking freedom. Others sought land, wealth, dominion. And between these newcomers and the first peoples, there were moments of peace and years of war. Treaties were signed in ink and broken in blood. Yet men like Squanto, Pocahontas, Massasoit tried to bridge the worlds. Not all saw each other as enemies. As towns grew and forests fell, native resistance flared. Pequot War, King Philip's War, Pontiac's Rebellion. But the tide kept rising. The people remembered their ancestors, but the newcomers remembered only maps. Centuries later, a traveler walks through the Black Hills. The wind sighs across the grass. He finds a stone carved with symbols, ancient, still whole. In the stillness, he remembers, America was not discovered. It was met with surprise, with beauty, with sorrow. It was home before it was colony. It was song before it was silence. And yet the songs remain, in names of rivers, in lines of poetry, in the stars above New Mexico, in the dreams of children tracing feathers in school books. The people are still here. As colonies spread across the eastern seaboard, the foundations of a new world began to harden. Forests were felled, towns plotted in rigid lines. Native lands were parceled into tracts and sold. What was once shared became owned. European settlers brought livestock, iron plows, mills, and muskets. Agriculture transformed the land. Roads and ports connected towns to distant markets. Colonists built schools, churches, and governments modeled after distant monarchies. The land that had pulsed with 1,000 tribal rhythms now echoed with the clang of bells and the call of sermons. But with growth came conflict. Settlers pushed west, and the resistance of native peoples grew fierce. The French and Indian War fought over land and alliances, pulled tribal nations into European rivalries. After Britain's victory, the proclamation line of 1763 was drawn to protect native lands, but was quickly ignored. Tensions brewed not only with native nations, but within the colonies themselves. Taxation, control, and distance from the British Crown ignited rebellion. In 1776, the Declaration of Independence marked the birth of a new nation founded on liberty, yet shadowed by slavery and exclusion. The new United States expanded westward, often through violence and broken promises. The Trail of Tears carried thousands of Cherokee from their homelands. Plains tribes fought desperately to protect their buffalo and freedom. Treaties were signed, broken, and forgotten. Still, the native spirit endured. Culture adapted. Languages persisted. Songs survived in secret. By the 19th century, the railroad stretched coast to coast. Immigrants arrived from every continent. The land became a mosaic-rich, complicated, scarred. Cities rose, factories churned, and laws changed. The Civil War came like a storm, reshaping the soul of the nation. Slavery was abolished, but wounds lingered. Reconstruction promised healing, but delivered hardship. Then came industrial might. America built steel empires, sent light through wires, and cars down roads. The Gilded Age brought opulence and inequality. Immigrants worked in mills and mines. Women fought for the vote. The land was restless. 2 world wars tested America's ideals. Soldiers crossed oceans. At home, factories roared. After victory, the country emerged stronger, economically unmatched. The Cold War shadowed a golden age. Rockets soared. Civil rights marches shook streets. A man walked on the moon. Technology transformed life. Silicon Valley rose. Wall Street boomed. The internet rewired thought. And through it all, America stood flawed, vast, and powerful. A superpower born of paradox, liberty and conquest, opportunity and exclusion. Today, the land still remembers. Its people walk forward carrying stories, asking questions, building anew. The 19th century bore witness to a paradox. The United States grew, stronger cities rose, industries buzzed, and the dream of manifest destiny consumed the hearts of settlers. Yet in the shadows of this growth, the oldest civilizations on the land struggled to survive. Native Americans, fragmented by war, relocation, and trauma, turned inward. But even as land was taken, identity endured. In Oklahoma Territory, the Cherokee rebuilt schools and governments. In the Southwest, Pueblo peoples maintained dances forbidden by missionaries. Across the plains, ghost dances rose like a plea to the stars, a spiritual call for return, for healing, for the bison to rise again, and the white man to vanish like a storm. But after Wounded Knee in 1890, the resistance quieted, not because it ended, but because it changed. A war of culture began. One fought in classrooms, in art, in whispers. Native voices were silenced in public, but hummed in private. Grandmothers told stories by firelight. Children learned songs forbidden by law. Medicine men kept herbs hidden behind clapboard walls. While America pushed toward industrial might, steel rails replacing sacred paths, and factories blotting the sky, native peoples held to memory as tightly as breath. The turn of the 20th century saw America transformed. From sea to shining sea, railroads wove iron across the land. Immigrants from Europe poured in Italians, Irish, Poles, Jews, each chasing a dream sold by statue and slogan. In smoky cities, children worked beside machines. In fields, sharecroppers bent beneath the sun. Yet alongside the hardship was promise. Education, mobility, and invention flourished. Inventions like the telephone, the automobile, and the airplane rewrote time and distance. Skyscrapers pierced the clouds. Jazz hummed from alleyways. Women marched for the vote. America began to see itself as exceptional, not only a land of opportunity, but a beacon. Yet poverty, racism, and inequality still scarred the nation. Native Americans remained in legal limbo, often landless, voiceless, denied citizenship until 1924. Still, seeds of change were sown. Tribes like the Navajo built schools. The Iroquois League still held council. In Alaska, the Tlingit resisted colonial erasure. The land watched, patient. Twice, the world was engulfed in war. In both world wars, Native Americans enlisted in disproportionate numbers. Navajo code talkers helped win the Pacific War. Others served in Europe, fighting not just enemies abroad, but prejudice at home. On reservations, war industries brought jobs, but also displacement. Boarding schools persisted, but native pride began to reawaken. After World War II, America emerged a superpower. Its cities glittered with neon. Its cars rolled across highways. Its influence reached into every corner of the globe. But for Native Americans, the battle for justice was only beginning. The 1960s and 70s sparked revolution. Inspired by the civil rights movement, Native activists rose. They formed the American Indian Movement. They occupied Alcatraz Island reclaiming land with symbol and voice. They marched on Washington. They demanded self-determination. The occupation of Wounded Knee in 1973 was both an outcry and a prayer. Shots rang out again, but this time the world was watching. Treaty rights were re-examined, sacred sites defended, languages revived. Schools once used for assimilation became tools for empowerment. Slowly, America began to listen, not enough, not always, but more than before. As the 21st century dawned, Native nations stood scarred but standing. Tribal sovereignty was recognized in law, though often contested in practice. Casinos brought economic lifelines to some, but not all. The fight for water rights, sacred land, and cultural recognition continued. In 2016, the Standing Rock Sioux stood against the Dakota Access Pipeline. Their cry, Miwikoni, echoed across the globe. Youth and elders stood side by side in prayer and protest. Today, Native voices rise in literature, film, politics, and science. Deb Haaland became the first Native American cabinet secretary. Indigenous authors win national prizes. Languages once nearly extinct are now sung by school children. The pain remains, but so does the fire. And now, as the wind moves through modern cities, the old spirits still walk. They are not ghosts. They are grandmothers teaching language by the stove, fathers hunting deer on sacred ground, children playing beneath stars that once guided the ancestors. America may have discovered itself through conflict, but its roots are older, deeper, sung in syllables older than the flag. From the Pueblo cliffs to the forests of the Oneida, from Inuit tundras to Seminole swamps, the story is not over. It continues in dreams, in battles, in lullabies. Final thoughts. As you rest, know this. The land remembers. It remembers those who came across oceans. It remembers those who rose from its soil. And in every tree, every stone, every river that once bore canoe or tears, the story still flows. Sleep, dear traveler. The past watches gently. And in your dreams, you may hear the voices beneath the trees. Before the United States of America could be born, a storm had to break over 13 colonies clinging to the edge of the Atlantic. The year was 1765. A young world writhed under the shadow of empire. Britain, deep in debt after the 7 Years' War, looked to its colonies for revenue. But in the dense forests and bustling ports of North America, that decision would light a fire. The Stamp Act was among the first sparks taxation without representation, they called it. The colonies, long used to relative autonomy, bristled under a crown they could not reach. Protests erupted from Boston to Charleston. The Sons of Liberty whispered in taverns. Pamphlets fluttered from the hands of printers, proclaiming liberty, resistance, and the rights of man. British redcoats, sent to restore order, found none. In 1770, the Boston Massacre painted cobblestone red. In 1773, the Boston Tea Party defied both commerce and crown. Repression followed. The intolerable acts tightened Britain's grip. But in doing so, they seeded rebellion. From Philadelphia in 1774 came the First Continental Congress, a union of voices, varied and unsure, yet united in defiance. By 1775, Lexington and Concord rang with musket fire. The revolution had begun. The colonies had no standing army, no navy worth mentioning. But they had conviction. They believed in a new order not of kings and crowns, but of people governing themselves. By 1776, the urgency for independence became unstoppable. Thomas Jefferson, a Virginian with ink-stained fingers and a keen mind, drafted the Declaration of Independence. Adopted on July 4th, its words still ring. We hold these truths to be self-evident. It was not just a political statement. It was a cry from the soul of a people refusing to bow. The American Revolution was no swift uprising. It was a brutal, years-long struggle, a crucible of fear and sacrifice. Farmers became fighters. Merchants became spies. Women melted pewter into bullets. Children carried messages on foot through enemy lines. The British Army, trained, uniformed, and vast, met ragtag militias who hid in forests, ambushed from ravines, and disappeared into the hills. General George Washington led an army often shoeless, often starving, but never without hope. Valley Forge became a symbol of endurance. Winter gnawed at bone and will. Disease stole more lives than bullets. Yet in the cold silence, Prussian General Friedrich von Steuben drilled the Continental Army into something formidable. Washington's leadership became legendary not for arrogance, but for resilience. He knew defeat. He knew retreat. But he also knew that liberty did not come without scars. Each colony contributed its sons, supplies, and spirit. New York was burned and captured. Boston held firm. The Carolinas turned into hotbeds of partisan warfare. In the shadows, the Iroquois Confederacy fractured as some sided with the British and others with the rebels. Foreign aid trickled in. France, seeing a chance to humble Britain, lent ships, soldiers, and silver. Lafayette, young and idealistic, fought beside American rebels. At Saratoga, in 1777, a crucial victory convinced the French to fully commit. The war turned. In 1781 at Yorktown, the final great drama unfolded. British General Cornwallis found himself trapped American troops before him, French naval power behind. After days of bombardment, he surrendered. And in 1783, the Treaty of Paris recognized a new reality. The United States of America young, fragile, and free was born. But it was not freedom for all. Women remained voiceless in the political arena. Enslaved Africans remained in bondage, their cries unheeded. Native peoples, many of whom had sided with the British, hoping to protect their homelands, now faced a new, expansionist republic. The revolution had planted a seed, but the harvest of justice was far off. Winning independence was only the beginning. Now came the harder task, building a nation. The Articles of Confederation, the first attempt at government, proved too weak. States acted like rival nations. Currency failed. Trade collapsed. Rebellion loomed, most notably Shays' Rebellion, when farmers rose against debt and injustice. In 1787, the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia sought to mend the wounds. Voices clashed. Slavery, representation, federal power all hot coals underfoot. Yet through compromise and vision, a new constitution emerged. The Great Compromise birthed the two-house legislature. The 3/5 compromise dehumanized millions. Yet the framework stood. In 1789, George Washington was elected president. He took office with solemn humility. A capital was planned, Washington, D.C., to rise from Swanland as a symbol of unity. The Bill of Rights followed 10 amendments promising liberty, speech, religion, assembly, due process. But the dream remained incomplete. Women could not vote. Enslaved people were counted, but not free. Native tribes, sovereign in their eyes, found no seat at the table. Still, America walked forward. The Republic, though flawed, endured. After independence, a restless spirit took hold. The new republic looked west. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803 doubled its land. Explorers Lewis and Clark mapped rivers and peaks, their journals filled with wonder and warning. But westward expansion came at a cost. Native nations, sovereign and ancient, were seen as obstacles. Treaties were signed, then broken. Lands were sold, then seized. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 forced entire peoples from ancestral homes. The Trail of Tears left thousands dead children, elders, whole nations walking to unfamiliar soil. Yet still, settlers poured west. Railroads followed. Gold was discovered. Cities rose. The myth of manifest destiny, that America was fated to rule from ocean to ocean, justified the wounds it caused. The West became both opportunity and oppression. It held dreams and death in equal measure. By 1860, America stood divided. Slavery, long a festering wound, now bled openly. The southern states, fearing abolition, seceded. War followed brother against brother, cannon against cannon. The Civil War tore the nation apart. More than 600,000 lives were lost. Battlefields like Gettysburg and Antietam became graveyards of a young country's conscience. In 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation declared freedom for slaves in the Confederacy. The tide turned. In 1865, the Union prevailed. Lincoln, who guided the nation through fire, was assassinated days later. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th granted citizenship. The 15th gave black men the vote. But Reconstruction was brief. Racism endured. Jim Crow rose. Still, the Union was preserved, and with it, the hope that liberty might yet live. After the Civil War, America looked inward, rebuilding railroads, factories, and fortunes. But by the turn of the century, it looked outward. In 1898, the Spanish-American War brought overseas territory. Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. The U.S. became an empire. Through the 20th century, it would grow into a superpower. But the roots of that strength, the spark that lit its fire, lay in its fight for independence. For all its contradictions, America's revolution inspired the world. France, Haiti, South America all echoed its call. Freedom was not perfect. Justice was not complete. But the idea that government existed by the consent of the governed took root. Epilogue to Independence. Echoes of the Declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident, so began the promise. Written in ink, but forged in blood. Even now, the words ripple through protest signs in courtrooms, through whispered hopes and defiant cries. Independence was not an end, but a beginning. And as the stars glimmer over forests, deserts, and cities once unseen by colonial maps, the dream continues unfinished, yet undying. In the decades following the Civil War, the United States transformed. Smoke rose from factory chimneys, and rails stitched the country together. Cities like Chicago, Pittsburgh, and Detroit roared with industry. Steel, oil, and coal became the lifeblood of a rising industrial giant. Immigrants arrived in waves from Ireland, Italy, Russia, China, each chasing the promise of a better life. They filled tenements, labored in sweatshops, and laid tracks across the continent. Life was hard, often brutal, but the dream of America fueled endurance. Innovators reshaped the world. Thomas Edison gave it electric light. Alexander Graham Bell brought the telephone. Henry Ford put the nation on wheels. The Wright brothers took flight. Yet inequality widened. The rich Carnegie, Rockefeller, Morgan held immense power. Laborers organized, marching for fair wages and safe conditions. Strikes erupted. Violence followed. But slowly reforms came. Child labor laws, workplace safety, the 8-hour day. These were won with sweat, sacrifice, and time. In 1917, The U.S. entered World War I. Though late to the fight, American troops helped tilt the balance in Europe. When the guns fell silent in 1918, the world looked different, and America was no longer a distant observer. The 1920s roared with jazz, flappers, and booming stock markets. But the dream was fragile. In 1929, the Great Depression began. Banks failed, jobs vanished, families starved. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal aimed to restore hope. Public works projects, Social Security, and regulations sought to rescue a drowning economy. Slowly, the country rebuilt. Then came World War II. The attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 thrust America into the conflict. Factories retooled for war. Women filled the workforce. Soldiers crossed oceans. The use helped defeat tyranny in Europe and the Pacific. When the war ended in 1945, two superpowers stood, the United States and the Soviet Union. The atomic age had begun. The Cold War was not fought with muskets, but with ideologies, espionage, and nuclear threats. Capitalism versus communism. Freedom versus control. From Berlin to Korea, from Vietnam to Cuba, the world trembled. America built highways, sent astronauts to the moon, and exported its culture across the globe. Rock and roll, Hollywood, and fast food became global symbols. But internally, the country wrestled with its soul. The civil rights movement, led by figures like Martin Luther King Jr., challenged segregation and demanded equality. Marches, boycotts, and speeches shook the conscience of the nation. Laws changed: Brown v. Board, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. But prejudice lingered. The journey toward justice continued. The late 20th century brought technological miracles. Computers, the internet, and mobile phones rewired life. Silicon Valley rose. Globalization linked markets. The Cold War ended in 1991. The Soviet Union dissolved. America stood alone economically, militarily, and culturally dominant. In 2001, the terrorist attacks of September 11th shocked the nation. Grief turned to resolve. Wars in Afghanistan and Iraq followed. The costs, human, financial, and moral, were immense. Recession struck again in 2008, but recovery followed. A new president, Barack Obama, inspired hope. Yet polarization deepened. The 21st century saw America reckoning with old and new wounds. Racial injustice, economic inequality, and climate change loomed large. Political divisions hardened. Movements rose: Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, #MeToo. Each shouted that the promise of America was incomplete. Technological shifts disrupted jobs and truth itself. Social media connected billions, yet fractured societies. The pandemic of 2020 laid bare vulnerabilities. Health, equity, and leadership were all tested. Yet still, people voted, marched, believed. The dream, battered but unbroken, endured. Today, America is a global power. Its influence spans finance, military, culture, and science. From Hollywood films to medical breakthroughs, its reach is vast. But so are its contradictions: wealth and poverty, freedom and incarceration, innovation and inequality. The journey from colony to superpower is etched with triumph and trauma. It was built on ideals, yes, but also on the backs of enslaved people, displaced tribes, and exhausted immigrants. The story of America is not a simple march of greatness. It is a mosaic of suffering and spirit, oppression and opportunity, cruelty and compassion. And it is still being written. Final reflection: the story that never ends. The discovery of America did not begin a new world. It collided with one that had always been here. The revolution did not complete freedom. It cracked the door open. The rise to power did not erase injustice. It only magnified it. But the voices beneath the trees, native, enslaved, immigrant, settler, soldier, dreamer, still whisper through the leaves. They ask us to remember, to listen, to carry the story forward. And so we do, Dot. And now, as your eyes grow heavy and the final echoes of this journey fade into the hush of night, may these stories linger like distant stars guiding your dreams. America's path has never been straight. It has twisted through dark forests and over bright summits, through valleys of conflict and meadows of peace. May we not forget those left behind in the turning of history's wheel. May we honor the ancestors who sowed the soil with hopes too large to fit in one lifetime. And may we, in our quiet moments, be reminded that history is not finished, because you are a part of it. Sleep well, traveler. Tomorrow, the story continues.